Thank you for joining us on this Foundations for Heart Change video. This video is called File Drawers, and it delves deeply into the spiritual makeup that is who we are as human beings. The modern world, science, has largely discounted the human spirit, and because of that, there's so many different things that we don't understand, can't explain. We can't figure out how we work as a human being. When you start seeing that spiritual component, it really explains so many different things, and it gives us the ability to speak into people's lives at a level that we simply can't if we don't understand a spiritual model. Again, I want to say thank you, Levi, for joining us on this video series. It's been great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here today.
And Heather, you're hanging in there. You're a rock over and over again. I actually like having the two of you on this one, and I'm actually going to quiz you a little bit here because you're both very much intelligent, inquisitive thinkers that you don't just accept things at face value and you challenge it and you question it. Can either of you remember where you were at when this began to dawn on you, the spiritual model and some of the kinds of things that I'm talking about? Where did your mind go? Heather, over and over again, you've said, well, I had never thought of that, or I had never understood that, or never contemplated that before. And the spiritual model actually just challenges so many different things because our world thinks inside of a mind-centered worldview and pretty much discounts the human spirit. Think about some of the responses that you had when you first heard that being presented.
Not a lot of buy-in. I didn't really know a lot about spiritual model, and then I experienced the pink cloud that we talk about, and everything was great. And I thought I was better. I thought I'd found Jesus and everything was hunky-dory and things were just going to be great for the rest of my life. And then the bottom dropped out. And I spent the next month the angriest I've ever been in my life. And there was just a spirit of woundedness, of rejection, of abandonment that was just driving my thoughts and emotions every day. There wasn't really anything I could do to move myself out of this place. It wasn't a thought process I could change. It was this consistent driver. And it took me a long time to realize that there were layers underneath that were pushing this thing.
So many people say the battle's in the mind. And in the last video, we really laid that out, talking about belief systems and how they work. And a lot of what we explored there was all of the interlocking pieces. So when someone comes along to you and just change your thinking. Well, that's wonderful. I would love to just change my thinking, but it really isn't that easy. And that's what you just shared about. Heather, any thoughts in terms of what your first responses were to some of these ideas?
That was hard for me. I wrestled with it. I was like, do you mean my soul? Like the part of me that goes to heaven when I die? Or what is a spirit? I didn't really get it. When I connected it with the language of heart change, I started to understand the Bible uses those words interchangeably quite often. And so Jesus talks about out of the heart flow. Flow these things and guard your heart, for from it flow the spirit of life. So as I put it in context with the word of God, it started to make sense. Oh, you're talking about this subconscious part of me that seems to be a storehouse for pain, for woundedness, for anger, for all of these things that Jesus talks about that on my own flow out of me. So it started to actually sort of make more sense why I was having some of the reactions to life that I would and reactions to people that I would. When it really became practical for me was when I would notice that I would lack self-control in certain situations and that I would seem to be coming from a place of woundedness or anger or hurt in a way that was not lined up with what was happening in that moment. Like one day someone said something and I immediately took offense. I didn't know this woman. There was no reason for me to take offense to what she said. But when I prayed about it and the Holy Spirit revealed to me that the tone was very similar to a tone that I'd had in relationships with, well, my mom. I recognized, oh, I'm responding to my mom and she's not even here. And so I started to become more aware that I'm having these, what we call triggers, or these file drawers being opened, and they're happening without my consent. I'm not going over and reaching and pulling it out, because I can do that too. I can go and wallow and read over every horrible thing I've ever done and every horrible thing that's ever been done to me. But this is happening at a different level. And you called that the spirit level. And that started to really make sense to me.
That abiding reaction is what really made me more cognitive of spirit, because I really didn't know what he was talking about. But when I could start to see how I responded and that there was something outside of my thought process, outside of my body driving it, I knew there was something else, but it was the consistent reaction that illustrated it.
You guys are jumping into the whole idea of file drawers, which we'll explain more as we go on, and the idea that there's a storehouse and we respond out of that storehouse, which fits the language of Matthew 12:35, which we've been talking about quite a bit in the last few videos. But I want to start more basic than that. And the first point is your God-breathed spirit gives you life. To me, that point is so important because we've made ourselves a clump of cells, something that just kind of exists, and you have no purpose other than if you create your own purpose and you walk it through. And if you go all the way back to Adam, Adam was a formed human being, but God breathed on him and he came to life. You go the language of Psalm 139, where the scriptures tell us this idea again. It's like there was this inner being, and then you were given a body. It's like God saw you before you were even formed, before you were even created. So there's a breath of God piece. Ecclesiastes tells us very clearly that when God breathes, you become alive, and when the spirit leaves your body, you die. And that's an incredible point to understand who we are as human beings. We need that spiritual breath to animate us, to make us alive. And there is something called a human spirit with a definite shape, with a definite function. And when that spirit's gone, it's a very different setting. Now, rather than go into that deep, let's just let that rest, that we've got that point that there's a God-breathed spirit and there's spiritual function going into us. The second point, which really starts getting us into the file drawers, is that your spirit is moldable. We've found this all the way through. Your character is not just, it's not this thing that just is. It's moldable. When you interact with God, what happens? He's shaping you. If you choose not to interact with God, then at that point, there's a hardness, there's a resisting, and there's a shaping that comes from resisting God. There's a shaping that comes when you interact with parents. There's a shaping that comes when you resist with parents. And this is all of life. And so your spirit actually is moldable. And back to what you mentioned, Heather, there's a level of storehouse. There's a storing up that's going on. And both of you referred to that. And so that really is important. And one of the things that we store up are wounds. And they're not stored up at the spirit level. They're not stored up in your memory. They're stored up in a thing that science calls the subconscious. Science doesn't really know what to do with the subconscious. Yes, there's regions of the brain and you have all kinds of different things like that. But what about the things that happen very, very early in the womb? I tell the story of being an unwanted child and how that rejection literally fed all the way through my years up to age 40. Science can't explain that, but if you are God-breathed and fully functioning from conception, now I have a pretty good explanation for why those things in the womb actually impact us.
I have a tendency to dwell on stuff. And in active addiction in my previous life, I found myself, I would dwell and focus on different things that had wounded me, that had hurt me. And my mind will work things over from so many different angles and roll it and chew on it. And I thought I was coming to some resolution and know what I was doing was I was worshiping my pain and I was becoming more like my abusers through it. But I have found in my new life, in my walk with Christ, that I can dwell on the love God has given me, the blessings God has shown me. I can dwell on the things He's doing in my life, the miracles I've seen Him work. And just like how I worshiped my pain, I can worship God and become more like it by using that same, I don't know, I guess it can be a gift or a curse. You are what you focus on.
When you're in the womb, the spirit is fully functioning immediately. And I actually believe it's fully functioning all the way up to death. Your body rises, it grows up, it declines. And so during the early stages of your life, your mind isn't functioning, your natural mind, it isn't recording, the brain isn't there, it's not capable. But we find over and over again, the stories are there. People are in the womb. While they're in the womb, their experiences that are going on, they begin shaping, laying down a layer of rejection or abandonment or pain. Let's just call it pain, as you would talk about. And then there ends up being consistent reactions to that pain or that abandonment. It actually starts before the mind is developed enough to explain it. That's what I'm saying. The scientific model doesn't have a great answer for that. You also go to Jacob and Esau. They're already fighting while they're in the womb. How can that be? Their brains aren't that developed. Their purpose, all of that's not developed. You see John the Baptist leaping in his mother's womb when Mary shows up. There's things that happen to us that if you think about it, if I'm spiritually functioning from conception and I'm already beginning to record, not thoughts, but I'm beginning to record spiritual imprints. I'm beginning to feel unwanted, unloved, abandoned, rejection. If that's interacting with my spirit, now I'm literally laying down foundational layers that are going to impact my reactions the rest of my life. And I'm not going to have a logical explanation for it. Let's move into the third point that I have about your spiritual man. Your spirit houses your unique thumbprint of God. And this ends up being really important because Levi, in your thumbprint, you're more of a power person. You're more of a getter done. I'm going to move. I'm going to shake. God literally pours into us a unique part of His character into every one of us. So now if there's abandonment coming your direction, think about this. This doesn't seem, it's not a stretch. You're going to respond differently to that abandonment than a compassion person would. You're going to instinctively, back to Jacob and Esau, you're going to instinctively want to fight. You're going to instinctively want to have this power response. Whereas the compassion person, someone who's a God-breathed, deeply compassionate person, they're going to be in a situation where they're like, oh, really? You don't love me? That's how you feel about me? And so it's interesting, your spirit, first of all, is this file drawer. It's this storehouse that is beginning to receive recordings, but it also has its own unique thumbprint to where it's like it's already making, I hate to say this because it doesn't work intellectually, but it's already making choices. It's already responding out of who it is while it's right there in the womb. And so there's formation, there's moldability, there's this shaping that's already starting to go on in the womb. When you understand these things and you understand the early years and the power of the early years, so many people that I've worked with, they're just like, what's wrong with me? I'm a mess. And when you're able to start unfolding, this is who you are. This is your thumbprint. This is who God created you to be. These are the experiences that you've had. You put the experiences that you had, especially in the early years, and you picture it along with the thumbprint of God. All of a sudden, you're able to go, whoa, I'm not such a weirdo at all. I'm not such a loser. I'm functioning the way God created me to function. He just didn't create me to be born in a sin-racked world that was going to mold my spirit into this grotesque image. If you go back several videos ago where I talked about the very things God created for good, have been turned to evil. This is one of those situations where when you look at how God created us spiritually, he created it for our good. If we had godly parents walking in peace, wanting us, loving us, our spirit is shaped one way. But on the other hand, if we go through this ugliness of sin, which is where so many people have been, it shapes our spirit another way. And now that thumbprint begins to get distorted. And then I begin to be even angry at myself. It's like, what's wrong with me?
I have noticed that I have the same gifts in ministry as I did active addiction. They just look a little different. And another neat part about God is,
let me stop you. That's like a lightning rod out there that people are like, what are you talking about? You better give an example on that.
Same gifts. I'm in active addiction. I'm controlling and oppressive.
Let me add one in. You had a huge loyalty piece in active addiction. And that loyalty piece is I'm going to cover my own and I'm going to destroy my enemies. And you have all of that going. Those same traits carry forward now when you're ministering to people. That loyalty piece is still really strong. Obviously, the I'm going to destroy people is needing some work, and that has a different manifestation when you're in God.
All the things in my life that I've defined myself as broken, as areas that weren't like other people that I wish would change, I find God time and time again redeems those things, uses those things I wish I didn't have, those things, those wounds that have changed my heart in some negative way. And I'm like, man, I wish God would just make that go away. He doesn't make that go away. He uses it to some way for his glory, which is really cool.
In the book Greater Than, I explain 7 core values that shape into personality types, shape into character types. It's a description of the thumbprints. And so there's different people with different things. I'll just read them off quickly. You can obviously obtain that material and study it if you would like to. But the 7 primary core values are proclaiming / fighting for what is right. And that's a little bit of what you were just talking about. You also have the idea of serving and meeting the need. There are people who that's just their heartbeat. That's their thumbprint. Now, just an asterisk here. Everybody is unique. Nobody fully fits these categories, but these categories help us to understand people a little bit better. The next one is understanding. There are people who are thinkers. It's like, I want to know, I want to understand. There are people who are coaches. They want to come alongside. They want to encourage. They want to maximize people's potential and work them through that. There are nurturers who, these people frequently also are very much creative, and they like to work with new things and create new things. There are people who are organizers. And then there are people who are connecting, supporting people. They've got a strong compassion, etc. Heather, I can remember when we were at a conference and all of a sudden you woke up and realized, and the term we use is giver, but you recognize that loyalty piece and some of the giver traits. And it was just like eye-opening for you in terms of that's why I've been behaving the way I've been behaving. All of us operate out of our thumbprint, out of this core design. Share a little bit about that.
It actually wasn't at the retreat, though. It was the next day or the week after. We were talking about what we had learned. And I had seen in the giver my oldest son. I was like, that is him. I mean, boom, he is a prophet and he is a giver. There's no doubt about it. I could see it. But we were sitting in class and pastor said something like, we were kind of recapping the retreat and what did you learn about yourself and what did you find out about yourself? And he said something about, you don't think you're a giver? And I was like, no.
How dare you?
That's my son. Well, all I could think is that's my son. What? I was up the entire night reading this book. I'm looking over it again because I was looking through the lens of his mom, and looking at him like that. I thought, I'm a teacher. I love knowledge. I love sharing knowledge. I could see that, no problem, which actually turns out to be a gift that I've inherited through my family. But I could not see that giver in myself because I was seeing it in him. And I think that happens with a lot of us, actually. And what I recognized was all the giver traits are things I resist within myself. They are things that have hurt me, that have set me up for disappointment, have set me up for failure.
Your spirit man has a God-breathed core that are these deep desires, deep things that I care about. When those get violated, it hurts us very deeply. And so then we start trying to do all kinds of human things to protect that area. Again, as you understand this and you understand that deep thing was there, so now I've done avoidance. I've done everything else under the sun to try to manage life. And that leads us right into our next point. The memory, and I put it in quotes, memory in quotes, the memory in your spirit is organized into file drawers full of similar spiritual imprints. A lot of times it's just easier to see it in the negative. Hopefully our spiritual memory should be full of peace and of joy and things like that. But what our spiritual memory tends to be is full of things like abandonment or rejection or bitterness or betrayal, or how about this one, slandered, smeared, shamed. You mentioned that one. Fear or anxiety, victimized, intimidated, dominated. Shall I keep going? Delayed, frustrated, ridiculed, belittled, condemned, marginalized, violated. I mean, you can go through all of these different kinds of things, because when the deep core desires are not being met, or worse yet, are being trampled on in a way that we're being traumatized, now my thumbprint is interacting with life, with pain, and I begin to record those things. And what I believe happens is, they're recorded in sectors. It's like, okay, this one goes into this file drawer. And we use the term file drawer because people can think of a filing cabinet, and we have drawer 1, drawer 2, drawer 3. And so I have all of these files that are similar. All of my abandonment files go into one drawer. Well, then you go back to the idea of triggers. This makes triggering so much more understandable, because why am I triggered? Because I have all of these abandonment files in one drawer. If you come along and you open that file drawer, you by some word, some action, again, we're spiritual beings, so it doesn't even have to be at the conscious level. It can be at a totally subconscious level. It can be, oh, you're triggering my mother, you're triggering my father, you're triggering whoever, whatever. So whenever there's a spiritual approximation to a father, to a previous wound, to some interaction, that goes past your mind into that spiritual file drawer, it triggers it, and now that file drawer gets yanked open. And it's yanked open, so now I'm not just dealing with one file, I've got an entire file drawer that I'm dealing with. And so then that goes back to what you were talking about, Heather, of like, I have all of these responses and I don't even know why I have these responses. This whole concept of file drawers is just amazing in terms of explaining how we actually function and why we respond at the extreme levels that we do, or the hiding levels, or the compensating levels, or all of the different things we do just to try to manage the pain, to try to manage the deep stuff inside of ourselves.
When I can see in myself that I am not responding to the person in front of me, but I'm responding either out of a person from my past or a wound, it'll generally change the direction of the conversation, but so often that's in hindsight. I currently have a friend that triggers that mom file drawer, and I constantly try to save this girl. I find myself not sleeping at night. I find myself once again a teenager trying to save my alcoholic mother and falling short. And it's wild how those things can be connected spiritually and draw stuff from 25 years ago instantly. I mean, just bam, I'm back to being 15 again.
When you see the spiritual picture, all of this just begins to almost instantly make sense. The stuff that's like the logical mind, the time frames, all of that, it's like it makes no sense. But when you see the spiritual imprints, it starts to make sense. And that takes us into the next point, which is your spirit operates with an eternal, again, I put it in quotes, an eternal or outside of time capacity. You already just described that. here I am. I'm back at 15. I'm much older than that now. I don't know if you want your age out there, but I'm much older than that now. And so literally decades have gone by, and it's as if I was 15 all over again, all in the same instant. Your spirit operates outside of time. So when a file drawer gets open, I'm dealing with these files, and generally, it's hard to see, and sometimes we can't see. But generally, all the way back at the very back of the file drawer, that's stuff that happened in the womb. That's stuff of how I was treated in the womb, the rejection that was just swirling around me. Maybe mom and dad were fighting, and so at that point, mom was told to leave or whatever. You may not understand that intellectually, but spiritually, you're in tune with that while you're in the womb, and you're already starting to drink in, and it's beginning to be incorporated. So now when I turn 15, I'm not just dealing with 15-year-old stuff. I'm dealing with womb stuff. I'm dealing with 2-year-old stuff. I'm dealing with 8-year-old stuff, and I'm dealing with 15-year-old stuff. And now it's really not so hard now to step back and go, oh, no wonder I'm having a struggle, and I can't just be a better person.
My parents were involved in a violent crime while my mom was pregnant. Then there was some birth defects when I was born, and then a lot of trauma between mom and I my entire life. We had a really strained relationship, but out of the very beginning, there was conflict. I mean, I was born into conflict, essentially.
Well, and that gets into a whole nother concept that we've been talking about off and on through this series, which is normal. Your conscience, your spiritual conscience, your spiritual evaluation of right and wrong actually comes off from normal. So if conflict and craziness is your normal, if it's ever peaceful around your house, you're looking around going, what's wrong? What's wrong? So that shaping of the human spirit is huge, and it's a huge part of our responses. And as I said, the current scientific model just doesn't give that a complete understanding.
One of the things that I had sort of seen through my many attempts to do this, because again, I think especially the psychological world, and I was trained as a therapist, and they try to do this, so they talk about, needing to do talk therapy and talk about, the whole Sigmund Freud, tell me about your mother kind of thing that people laugh about, but not recognizing that it's spiritual. They try to face it at an intellectual place, and it just misses the mark because they're hitting the wrong place. Because intellectually, I can understand those things happened when I was a kid. They have no effect on me now. But what that really did was send me into shutdown. So that all of that happened, I slammed that file drawer and thought that it wasn't happening anymore.
Let me jump in. You're a fixer.
Yes.
One of the things about you is a fixer. So when you couldn't understand it and it didn't work, back to your thumbprint, all of a sudden now that's just stealing your value because I'm supposed to be a fixer and I don't have answers.
Yes, that's true. That's part of a part of the giver, really. I'm thinking about, little kids come to you with their boo-boos and they want you to kiss it and make it better. And that's part of my role. But what I had already recognized and what I've now seen is actually a spiritual heritage. I started thinking about the messages that I had received as we started looking at these file drawers. And where did I get these ideas? For example, that I'm only as good as what I do for others. So my performance came out of that. And I could look around and see who else in my life has that. Well, of course, it's my arch nemesis. It's my mother. She also has the same thing.
And by the way, what we fixate on, we become. And so the frustration with mom, it was naturally, spiritually translated into you.
And because I'm a fixer, my family, also very chaotic. And it was apparent to me from a young age, that they would have been better off without each other. That was how I thought of it. My parents are still married. Praise God. 50 years married. It is an absolute miracle because they went through every bit of chaos and every bit of dysfunction you could ever imagine. But when I was a teenager, preteen, I would ask my dad, why don't you just leave her? Like, why do you keep doing this? They would break up and get back together. And I mean, it was just constant tension and chaos and infighting. And what he would say to me is, look at everything she does for me. Why would I leave her? And so I connected that the reason why I would get into these relationships with people who needed things from me is because if I could provide that, they wouldn't leave me. And so it all tied to that rejection. I was also an unwanted child, and by my father who told me this, right? And so to me, my merit and my worth, I had lots of these messages. And some of them, most of them came from hearing them come out of my parents' mouth, just watching their, the way they talk about the world. And some of it does come from the world, but things like you've got to earn your keep. Got to pay for your raisin. That's a Southern thing. You can tell I'm from the South. But I equated my personal safety and stability for my body being here on this planet and my emotional security and safety, because I have a natural value of relationship and family that I have to do and earn in order to remain here. And I had so many experiences that fed into that rejection file drawer that eventually it tipped over the compensation that I was trying to do, which is to prove myself through what I was doing. I am good enough for you to keep me. If I'm good enough, if I'm loving enough, if I'm smart enough, if I do enough for you, you won't reject me, betray me, hurt me. And of course, because I was coming at it from a mind model, I didn't recognize, because I didn't understand sin nature. I didn't understand that that's just people are going to hurt each other. We talked about that in the last video. And I also had never developed the ability to truly forgive someone. I didn't even know what that meant. And so I was continually having these experiences in my life where it was, why did you do this? Look at everything I did for you. And I could hear my mom in it. I'm like, oh gosh, my mom says that. And here it is coming out of my own. Why did you do that? Look at everything I did. Oh, I'm a martyr. Oh, I don't want to be a martyr. My mom's a martyr. But sure enough, it all comes back to that imprint that I'm as good as what I do. I have to earn my keep. I have to make myself worth keeping. And so all those years of spiritual shutdown was really me just living by that default. I hadn't actually slammed that drawer at all and kept it closed. I was living through it, by it.
This morning I was counseling with someone and just laying out this kind of stuff, because it really is pretty easy to see the spiritual picture. And I had explained several things, and at some point the person texted back and said, well, we're pretty good at seeing the problem, so what's the solution? Which is point number 6. Spiritual transformation happens when we let go of old imprints and drink in new imprints. So here we are, we're talking about fathers, mothers, abandonment, rejection, all of this sort of stuff. Those are the old imprints. That's what happens when our thumbprint, when who God breathed us into existence to be, when that thing gets crossed in a way that literally speaks to that thumbprint and said, you're failing, you're not measuring up, you're falling short of the glory of God, whatever language you want to use. When that happens, that's intensely painful. Somehow I've got to take those broken, messed up imprints and entire file drawers in some cases, and step by step, one file at a time, I have to get those changed. And a lot of times it really comes back to the basic character of God. This morning when I was counseling with the individual, I said, what you need is the unconditional love of God. Why is that so important? Very much what Heather was talking about. When I get into fixing, when I get into performance, when my value is based on that, we all know that our performance will never last. We all know that our performance can't be perfect, won't measure up. So we're looking forward and there's no sense of worth in us. There's no sense of value. So at some point, I've got to know that God will love me when I'm unlovable. At some point, I've got to know that there's people around me who will love me when I'm unlovable. And so in her particular situation, that was the key point. There are other people who need God as Father. They need the sense of being protected, of being kept in a safe place. There are other people who need encouragement. They've never really gone through that creative, explorative zone to where they were encouraged to step out and try your wings. And so they need Father as encourager. They need Him as the one who's surrounding and protecting. We all need things, first of all, from God, but second of all, we need those things also from people within our sphere. And then we need our brains, back to what we talked about in belief systems. We need our brains to begin to cooperate with what's going on, because your habitual thinking, now we are talking about thinking and the role that it plays. Your habitual thinking can keep you stuck in a place where you don't receive the unconditional love of God, because you're repeating back things to yourself and you're judging yourself and you're condemning yourself in a way that you don't let that gift of God come from the outside into you. I mean, this one's a powerful point. It talks about this is how you begin to heal. It's how you begin to clean up the file drawers.
That unwanted, unloved, would you love me if you knew me kind of sector of my heart was really damaged. And I got here and I got sober. I got married. I got my life mostly in order. I had a full-time job. Things were going really well. Teaching a little class on the side, and I got to a place where I could have just coasted through life for a long time. The people around me, I had real relationship. I mean, I was private. I kept my skeletons in my closet, but still engaged with people. Then I quit my full-time job and came to work for ministry. And for me to work in ministry, God saw it fit to bring some of them skeletons out of my closet. I had kept that unwanted, unloved area really kind of quiet and put away. And God didn't want that anymore. So He started bringing to the surface a lot of that anger in me, that scary level of anger, and brought it to the surface in a way that some of my key relationships had to interact with that Levi that's been triggered at that level, and caused me to kind of be exposed in a way that I wasn't really previously willing to do. I wasn't willing to share that with some of the people in my life. But God walking me through that and bringing that toxic anger to the surface and allowing the people in my life to see it, and they continued to love me was so huge in my growth, was so huge in my faith to God, and really ministered to that drinking in of the new imprint.
You're bringing up one of our one-liners, if it don't show up, you won't grow up. We want to just, by stealth, go in and open the file drawer and pull it up and take a good look at it, and nobody's looking, and okay, I'm going to throw this one in the fire.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how we want it to happen, but the reality is we're blind. We don't even see that it's there. We don't even know that it's there until it shows up in living color. And when it shows up in living color, we're in such a performance society that the vast majority of the time people come along and smack you. I mean, you're a fighter. They come along and boom, boom, take that. Put that thing back in your file drawer. I mean, and that's how we try to deal with things. And instead of seeing who God created us to be, understanding the wound that entered in because of who God created us to be, taking that thing and surrendering it to God in a way that we drink in the love and life of God to bring healing to that point. Instead of going through that process, we go back into a performance the vast majority of the time of, oh, I can never say that again. I can never be that person again. Well, what does that do to your worth? At some point, now I'm just staring at this thing, man, I'm a real loser. I don't know what's wrong with me. Well, that's tearing up your worth. And when it's tearing up your worth, it's tearing up your ability to walk with God, to be a healthy person, to heal in the way that we're talking about healing.
That's what I meant by living by default. We've been talking about a file drawer as if it's one of those old filing cabinets, but we're moving more and more to a paperless society. Well, computers work the same way. There are files and there's files within the files within the files, and there's executable files that are always running in the background of a computer. And you don't realize that they're there. You don't go in and click on it and make it happen. It just does it automatically. It pulls up the proper font. It pulls up the proper interface, the proper window, whatever you want to call it. And you don't even recognize that it's doing what it's been programmed to do. So for me, that it's not until it goes wrong, right? So when the computer goes wrong and I have to call tech support and they tell me to go, remember the old C- prompt thing that you would have to go into to fix something run, whatever. You'd have to go deeper into the computer to get to this file that you don't even know is running. But you don't ever know that you need to do that until something breaks. And so when that does show up, it's usually, in my experience, it's been running anyway. And it's just malfunctioned. My MO, my default setting is not working properly. And that's when my trigger happens, when my perfectionism, when my fixing, when my performance fails to do what it was programmed to do. I don't get that response. Then I recognize, whoa, I've been doing this all over my life. And it's been in my default setting and I didn't even recognize it.
The next question is very simply, so how do I know what to do and where to go? And again, these video series are not just put together haphazardly. I'm going to go back to belief systems, which is what we've been talking about, belief systems towards God, belief systems towards people. And let me give you an example. Belief system of everybody will hurt me, everybody will fail me. That's a belief system. So belief systems and, introducing another new term, and spiritual flows help us identify file drawers that need to be renewed. See, if it's one little file, do you know how quickly you can pray through that one and get healed? You're good to go. But when you've got an entire file drawer, you're going to be at it for a while. So the belief systems show us where we've been hiding. People will hurt me. Well, what does that tell you? Tells you a value system right away. It tells you that you care about relationships and compassion and long-term relationship. So that's back to my thumbprint. It begins to identify something that potentially will be a file drawer. Same thing, people will fail me. Well, now guess what? That tells me about me. I'm more of a performance person. And when people get in the way of my performance, I'm going to be mad at them. I'm going to be hurt. So those are the belief systems. And then the spiritual flows, this will be some new terminology, but I'm going to throw this out where I talk about, again, the negatives. It's easier to see a pride flow. When you're in a pride flow and you begin to see the dynamics of that, that can help you begin to understand, oh, I try to do things by myself. I've got to start changing that. And this really is an introduction for the next video where we talk about the one thing, obedience. But I try to do everything by myself. A fear flow. I'm frozen and I'm struggling. And basically the obedience step for that is take the next step. When you begin to understand things like pride, fear, rebellion, lust, bitterness, critical spirit, selfish ambition, in the same way that we had 7 thumbprints that give us an idea who we are, there's 7 spiritual flows in response to that. And again, there's more than 7. I've listed like 75 in one place. In order that it's not too complicated and we can simplify it, we bring it down to a few and begin to take a look at these things. When I start seeing the belief systems, I start seeing the spiritual flows. Now I'm able to more accurately identify my file drawer. Now when I'm having a response, I'm able to go back and go, am I responding inside of my pride? Am I responding inside of my belief systems? If I am, now I can go to Scripture. Now I can go to people. Now I can begin to do things to start the healing process. And what do? We've made it as if it is this magical thing of you just pray this one prayer the right way and everything's going to be better. Well, here's what I would say. God literally has been shaping you spiritually, literally from conception. I believe it's naive to believe that one prayer is going to be prayed that's going to completely unwire all of the, hear me, choices that you've made. One prayer can go in there and it can heal the wounding. It can do a lot of different things. But for us to get healthy, for us to get whole, we have to say yes. We have to say amen. And frequently when God's working to bring healing, He's bringing in this area, in this area, in this area, and we have to be saying amen, and we have to be saying yes, and we have to be choosing it over a period of time. That's why this ends up being a process and taking a longer period of time. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed this video. We could actually add video upon video upon video just on this topic, but we wanted to create a summary picture of the file drawer. All of us have file drawers that come out of our thumbprints. They come out of spiritual flows. They come out of belief systems. They come out of wounds that you've accumulated over a period of years. When you're able to identify these, and again, you don't have to identify everything that came along, but when you're able to identify areas and begin to see the character of God and drink that character of God into your life in those areas, it's radically transformational. That's the heart change approach. Hopefully this video is helping you see with greater clarity what we mean when we say heart change, what we see when we talk about the spiritual man and your spirit and spiritual function. As you get a hold of these terms, I believe you'll have tools that you've never had before that you can grab hold of, and you can walk towards healing and bringing life into your circle. Again, thank you for joining us with this video. And if you know people who would be blessed by it, pass it on. We'll see you next time.